The vast emptiness of space stretched out before Captain Ilara Chen as she gazed through the forward viewport of the United Earth Defense Force Starship Horizon. The ship's smooth, silvery hull gleamed under the light of distant stars, its sleek design a testament to humanity's technological prowess. Ilara's dark eyes, flecked with cybernetic enhancements, scanned the star field, searching for any sign of movement. "Captain," called out Lieutenant Ravi Patel from his station at communications, "we're picking up a distress signal." "It's not one of ours." Ilara turned, her short black hair swaying with the movement. "Origin." Ravi's fingers danced over his console. "It appears to be coming from a ship of Zarkonian design. They're not supposed to be in this sector." A murmur rippled through the bridge crew. The Zarkonians were a notoriously isolationist species, avoiding contact with other races whenever possible. Their presence here was unusual, to say the least. "Put it on speaker," Ilara ordered, her curiosity piqued. A burst of static filled the air, followed by a series of high-pitched clicks and whistles, the native language of the Zarkonians. The ship's advanced translation software kicked in, rendering the alien speech into comprehensible English. "Any vessels in range? Our ship has suffered catastrophic engine failure. Life support systems critical. We carry precious cargo. Please assist." The message repeated, growing more desperate with each iteration. Ilara's mind raced. The Horizon was on a routine patrol mission, far from the usual space lanes. They were the only ship in range capable of rendering aid. But relations between humans and Zarkonians were tenuous at best. Any misstep could spark an interstellar incident. "Opinions?" she asked, glancing around at her senior staff. Commander Jack Torres, her first officer, spoke up. "It could be a trap, Captain. The Zarkonians have never been fond of humans. This might be an attempt to lure us in." Dr. Amelia Frost, the ship's chief medical officer, shook her head. "We can't just leave them out there to die. Whatever their feelings towards us, basic decency demands we help if we can." Ilara nodded, weighing their words carefully. "Lieutenant Patel, open a channel to Earth Command. We need to inform them of the situation and request guidance." As Ravi complied, Ilara turned her attention back to the viewport. The stars seemed to mock her with their cold, distant light. She knew that every second they delayed could mean life or death for the aliens aboard that ship. The response from Earth Command came swiftly, but it did little to ease Ilara's concerns. Admiral Zhao's holographic image flickered to life in the center of the bridge. "Captain Chen," the Admiral's gravelly voice filled the air. "This is a delicate situation. The Zarkonians have made it clear in the past that they want nothing to do with humanity. However, we cannot ignore a cry for help, even from those who may not welcome our assistance." Ilara straightened, sensing the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "What are our orders, sir?" Admiral Zhao's expression was grim. "You are to render aid to the Zarkonian vessel, but proceed with extreme caution. We cannot afford a diplomatic incident. Gather as much information as you can about their presence in this sector, but do not press if they refuse to provide details. Above all, ensure the safety of your crew and ship. Earth Command out." As the hologram faded, Ilara turned to her crew. "You heard the Admiral. Let's move. Helm, set an intercept course for the Zarkonian ship. Maximum speed." The Horizon surged forward, its advanced engines propelling it through the void. As they neared the coordinates of the distress call, a shape began to resolve on their long-range sensors. "Captain," called out Ensign Maria Lopes from the science station, "I'm picking up some unusual readings from the Zarkonian ship. Their life support is indeed failing. But there's something else. The biosigns don't match typical Zarkonian patterns." Ilara frowned. "Explain." Maria's fingers flew over her console. "The readings suggest a large number of younger Zarkonians aboard, predominantly female. It's unusual for their kind to travel in such groups." The implications of this information weren't lost on Ilara. Whatever the Zarkonians were up to, It was far from a routine transport mission. As the horizon drew closer, the full scale of the alien vessel became apparent. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of the human ship. Its hull was a dark, mottled green, covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as they watched. "Hail them," Ilara ordered. Ravi nodded, sending out the communication. For several tense moments, there was no response. Then, suddenly, a voice crackled over the speakers. "Human vessel." The translated voice was cold, almost hostile. "We did not expect your kind to answer our call." Ilara stepped forward. "This is Captain Ilara Chen of the UEDF Starship Horizon. We received your distress signal and are here to offer assistance." There was a pause, filled only by the soft beeping of bridge instruments. When the Zarkonian spoke again, there was a note of desperation in its voice. "We accept your offer, human. Our situation is dire. But be warned, any attempt to take advantage of our weakness will be met with lethal force." Ilara suppressed a sigh. It was going to be one of those days. "Understood. We're preparing to dock. Please transmit any relevant technical data to assist with the rescue operation." As the crew bustled into action, Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more complex than a simple rescue mission. The unusual composition of the Zarkonian ship's passengers, their presence in this restricted sector, the reluctance to accept help. It all pointed to a mystery that could have far-reaching consequences. "Commander Torres," she called out. "Assemble a boarding party. Full environmental suits and armed, but weapons set to non-lethal. We don't want to appear threatening, but I'm not sending our people in defenseless." Jack nodded, his expression grim. "Understood, Captain. I'll lead the team myself." Ilara shook her head. "Negative, Commander. I'll be going over there personally. This situation requires a delicate touch, and as captain, the responsibility falls to me." She could see the protest forming on Jack's lips, but she held up a hand to forestall it. "That's an order, Commander. You have the bridge. Keep the horizon at yellow alert, and be prepared for anything." As Ilara made her way to the airlock, her mind raced with possibilities. What would they find aboard the Zarkonian ship? Why were so many young females being transported? And most importantly, how could she navigate this potential minefield without sparking an interstellar incident? The airlock hissed open, revealing the alien corridor beyond. Ilara took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. Whatever lay ahead, she was determined to face it head-on. With a nod to her team, she stepped forward into the unknown, ready to unravel the mystery that awaited them aboard the massive Zarkonian vessel. As they moved deeper into the ship, the air grew thick with tension. The alien architecture was both beautiful and unsettling, with walls that seemed to pulse with an inner light. Ilara's enhanced eyes picked up details her human companions missed, subtle shifts in the patterns, almost like a living language written in light and shadow. Suddenly, a group of Zarkonians rounded a corner, their tall, willowy forms towering over the human rescue team. Ilara raised her hands in a gesture of peace, acutely aware of the weapons trained on her and her crew. "We're here to help," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Please, take us to your command center." The lead Zarkonian, its iridescent scales shimmering under the strange light, regarded her with multifaceted eyes. After a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, it nodded, a single fluid motion. "Follow," it said, its translated voice tinged with a mix of resignation and hope. "But know this, human. The fate of our entire species may rest on what happens here today." With those ominous words hanging in the air, Ilara and her team were led deeper into the heart of the alien ship, each step bringing them closer to a truth that would change the course of human-Zarkonian relations forever. The Zarkonian Command Center was a marvel of alien engineering, a vast chamber filled with swirling holographic displays and pulsating organic-looking consoles. Captain Ilara Chen and her team stood at its center, surrounded by a sea of towering, iridescent aliens. The air thrummed with tension, and the faint scent of ozone. "I am Zarax, commander of this vessel," announced the tallest Zarkonian, its multifaceted eyes fixed on Ilara. "You claim to offer aid, human, but how can we trust your kind?" Ilara met Zarax's gaze steadily. "Trust is earned, Commander. We're here because you called for help. Let us prove our intentions through our actions." A ripple of clicks and whistles, the Zarkonian equivalent of murmuring, spread through the assembled aliens. Zarax's scaled brow furrowed, an expression Ilara's neural implants identified as a mix of skepticism and desperation. "Very well," Zarax finally conceded. "Our primary drive core has suffered a catastrophic failure. Without it, life support systems will fail within hours." Lieutenant Sarah Reeves, the Horizon's chief engineer, stepped forward. "If I may, I'd like to examine your engine room. Perhaps there's a way to interface our technology with yours for a temporary fix." Zarax hesitated, then nodded. "You may proceed, but under guard. The secrets of our propulsion systems are not to be shared lightly." As Sarah left with a Zarkonian escort, Ilara turned her attention back to Zarax. "Now about your passengers. Our scans indicated a large number of young females aboard. That's unusual for a Zarkonian vessel, isn't it?" The alien commander's scales rippled, a sign of agitation. "That information is not relevant to the rescue operation." "On the contrary," Ilara pressed, her tone firm but diplomatic. "Understanding the nature of your mission helps us prioritize our rescue efforts. If there are vulnerable individuals aboard—" "Enough," Zarax interrupted, its voice sharp. "You overstep, human. Our internal matters are none of your concern." Before Ilara could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. A young Zarkonian burst into the command center, its scales pale with fear. "Commander, the radiation shielding in Sector 7 is failing. The Genbank, it's at risk." Zarax's composure crumbled. "No, not the future of our race." Ilara's mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. "Genbank, you're carrying genetic material." The Zarkonian commander seemed to deflate, resignation replacing hostility. "Yes, human. This ship carries the last hope of the Zarkonian people. A plague has ravaged our homeworld, leaving much of our population sterile. These females, they are our last fertile citizens, carrying carefully cultivated embryos that may save our species from extinction." The gravity of the situation hit Ilara like a physical blow. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. It was a chance to save an entire civilization. "Commander Zarax," she said, her voice filled with determination, "I give you my word as a Starfleet officer that we will do everything in our power to save your people. Now, please, let us help." For a moment, Zarax studied her, its alien features unreadable. Then it nodded. "Very well, Captain Chen. Our fate is in your hands." Ilara tapped her comm badge. "Chen to Horizon. We need emergency transport of all personnel from Sector 7 of the Zarkonian ship to our medical bay. Prepare for possible radiation exposure." As the Horizon's transporters hummed to life, Ilara turned to Dr. Frost. "Amelia, go with them. Do whatever you can to stabilize the Genbank and treat any radiation poisoning." The doctor nodded grimly and hurried out. "Now," Ilara addressed Zarax, "we need to stabilize your ship before the radiation spreads. Any ideas?" The alien commander hesitated, then spoke reluctantly. "There is a failsafe, a series of emergency force fields that could contain the radiation. But activating them would require someone to enter the contaminated area." Ilara's jaw set. "I'll do it." "Captain." "No," protested one of her security officers. "The risk is necessary," Ilara finished firmly. "This is bigger than any one of us. Zarax, have your people transmit the activation codes to my suit's computer. I'm going in." As Ilara made her way through the twisting corridors of the alien ship, her suit's Geiger counter ticked ominously. The radiation levels were climbing rapidly, and she knew she had precious little time. She reached the control panel for the emergency force fields, her fingers flying over the alien interface as she input the activation codes. The panel sparked and sputtered, damaged by the radiation. "Come on," Ilara muttered, sweat beading on her brow inside her helmet. "Work, damn you." With a final desperate command, the force fields flickered to life. A shimmering barrier spread through the sector, containing the lethal radiation. But as Ilara turned to leave, she realized with horror that she was on the wrong side of the field. Her comm crackled to life. "Captain." It was Commander Torres, his voice tight with worry. "We've lost your signal. What's your status?" Ilara leaned against the wall, suddenly feeling very tired. "Mission accomplished, Jack. The radiation is contained. But I'm trapped in here with it." There was a moment of stunned silence, then a flurry of activity as her crew scrambled to find a solution. But Ilara knew the truth. The radiation levels were too high for a safe transport, and lowering the force field would doom the entire ship. As she felt the first effects of radiation poisoning begin to take hold, Ilara closed her eyes, at peace with her decision. She had saved the Zarkonians, potentially preserving an entire species. It was worth the sacrifice. Suddenly, a strange humming filled the air. Ilara's eyes snapped open to see a shimmering portal forming before her. A Zarkonian stepped through, its body encased in a glowing field of energy. "Quickly, human," the alien said, extending a hand. "This portal will not last long." Without hesitation, Ilara grasped the offered hand. She felt a strange tingling sensation, and then she was stepping out into the Zarkonian command center, surrounded by astonished faces, both human and alien. Zarak stepped forward, its eyes wide with what Ilara's implants identify as awe. "You were willing to sacrifice yourself for our people, a race not your own. We have misjudged humans greatly." As the adrenaline of the moment faded, Ilara swayed on her feet, the effects of her radiation exposure catching up with her. Dr. Frost was at her side, in an instant medical tricorder whirring. "We need to get her to sickbay immediately," the doctor said urgently. As Ilara was led away, she heard Zarak speaking to Commander Torres. "Your captain has shown us the true meaning of courage and compassion. Perhaps it is time for our peoples to talk." The last thing Ilara saw before losing consciousness was the sight of humans and Zarkonians working side by side, united in a common purpose. She smiled faintly, knowing that whatever happened next, a new chapter in interstellar relations had begun. In the Horizon's sickbay, Dr. Frost worked tirelessly to counteract the effects of Ilara's radiation exposure. The captain drifted in and out of consciousness, catching snippets of conversation and activity around her. She heard Lieutenant Reeves excitedly explaining how they had managed to integrate human technology with the Zarkonian drive core, restoring power to the alien ship. She caught glimpses of Zarkonian females, their scales shimmering with newfound hope, being tended to by human medical staff. As Ilara finally regained full consciousness, she found Commander Torres at her bedside, his face etched with concern and relief. "Welcome back, Captain," he said softly. "You gave us quite a scare." Ilara tried to sit up, wincing at the effort. "The Zarkonians, are they?" "Safe," Torres assured her, "thanks to you. The Genebank is stable, and we're escorting their ship to the nearest starbase for full repairs." A new voice joined the conversation, the translator rendering Zarax's clicks and whistles into smooth English. "Captain Chen, it brings me great joy to see you recovered." Ilara turned to see the Zarkonian commander standing at the foot of her bed, its posture one of respect and gratitude. "Commander Zarax," she greeted, her voice hoarse. "I'm glad we were able to help." The alien's multifaceted eyes seemed to shimmer with emotion. "You have done more than help, Captain. You have given us a future. And you have shown us that perhaps our isolationist ways have been misguided. There is much our peoples could learn from each other." As Ilara absorbed the magnitude of this statement, she realized that her actions had not only saved lives, but potentially change the course of interstellar politics. The rescue mission had become a first step towards a new era of cooperation between humans and Zarkonians. With a mix of exhaustion and excitement, Ilara settled back into her bed, her mind already racing with the possibilities that lay ahead. The stars outside the horizon's windows seemed to shine a little brighter, promising a future filled with new discoveries, challenges, and most importantly, hope. The days following the rescue were a whirlwind of activity aboard the Horizon. As the ship escorted the massive Zarkonian vessel to Starbase 12, Captain Ilara Chen found herself at the center of a delicate diplomatic dance. The Zarkonians, long isolationists, were cautiously opening up to human interaction, but centuries of mistrust weren't easily overcome. Ilara stood in the Horizon's observation lounge, watching the stars streak by at warp speed. The door chimed, and she turned to see Commander Torres enter, a data pad in hand. "Captain," he greeted her, his expression a mix of excitement and concern. "We've received word from Starfleet Command. They're ecstatic about the potential for improved relations with the Zarkonians. But they're also worried." Ilara raised an eyebrow. "About?" Torres handed her the datapad. "They're concerned about the Zarkonians' genetic engineering practices. The embryos in the genbank, they'd been heavily modified. Some at Command are calling it a violation of Galactic law." Ilara frowned as she scanned the report. The Zarkonians' desperate attempt to save their species had led them down a path that many in the Federation considered ethically questionable. It was a complication she hadn't anticipated. "Have the Zarkonians been informed of these concerns?" she asked. Torres shook his head. "Not yet. Command wanted us to handle it delicately." Ilara sighed. "Of course they did. All right. Set up a meeting with Commander Zarax. We need to address this head-on." An hour later, Ilara found herself face-to-face with the Zarkonian commander in one of the Horizon's conference rooms. The alien's iridescent scales seemed duller than usual, a sign of stress that Ilara's neural implants easily picked up on. "Commander Zarax," Ilara began, choosing her words carefully. "We've received some concerns from our superiors regarding the nature of your genetic preservation efforts." Zarax's multifaceted eyes narrowed. "Explain." Ilara took a deep breath. "The level of genetic modification in your embryos goes beyond what many in the Federation consider ethical. There are laws against such extensive engineering of sentient beings." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Zarax processed this information. When the alien spoke, its voice was cold with barely contained anger. "You would deny us our only chance at survival because of your arbitrary ethical standards. We face extinction, Captain Chen. What right do you have to judge our methods?" Ilara held up a hand in a placating gesture. "We're not judging, Commander. We're trying to understand. Perhaps if you could explain the necessity of these modifications." "Necessity?" Zarax interrupted, its scales rippling with agitation. "The necessity is our continued existence as a species. The plague that ravaged our world didn't just leave us sterile. It altered our very genetic structure. Without these modifications, any children born would be wrong, twisted. Is that what your Federation would prefer?" The passion in Zarax's voice was palpable, and Ilara felt a pang of sympathy. But she also knew that she had a duty to uphold the principles of the Federation. "I understand your position, Commander," she said softly. "But surely there must be a middle ground, a way to preserve your species without resorting to such extreme measures." Zarax's posture stiffened. "And who would determine what measures are extreme, Captain? Your Federation, with its history of genetic purity laws that nearly doomed augments to extinction. Or perhaps the Andorians, who have their own ethically questionable breeding programs." Ilara winced internally. The Zarkonian had clearly done its homework on Federation history, and the barbs struck uncomfortably close to home. "You're right," she admitted. "We're far from perfect. But that's why dialogue is so important. We can learn from each other, Find solutions that respect both our ethical standards and your need for survival. For a long moment, Zarax was silent, its alien features unreadable. Then, with a sound that Ilara's translator rendered as a weary sigh, the Zarkonian spoke. Perhaps you are right, Captain. But understand this, we will not simply abandon our efforts. The future of our entire race depends on them. Ilara nodded. I wouldn't ask you to. But I hope you'll be open to working with our scientists, to finding alternatives that might be more universally acceptable. As the meeting concluded, Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a razor's edge. One misstep could undo all the progress they'd made and plunge their species back into isolation and mistrust. Over the next few days, tensions aboard both ships continued to simmer. The Zarkonian females, aware of the controversy surrounding their unborn children, became increasingly agitated. Reports of altercations between human crew members and Zarkonian visitors began to trickle in. Ilara found herself constantly mediating disputes, trying to bridge the vast cultural divide between the two species. It was exhausting work, made more difficult by the fact that she was still recovering from her radiation exposure. One particularly trying day, as Ilara was about to retire to her quarters for some much-needed rest, her comm badge chirped urgently. Captain to the medical bay, immediately. Dr. Frost's voice was tight with stress. Ilara's heart raced as she hurried through the corridors. Had something happened to the genbank? To one of the Zarkonian females. As she entered sickbay, she was met with a scene of chaos. A young Zarkonian female lay on a biobed, her scales pale and sickly. Dr. Frost and her team worked feverishly around her, while a group of agitated Zarkonians hovered nearby, clicking and whistling in distress. Report, Ilara demanded, stepping up to Dr. Frost's side. The doctor's face was grim. One of the embryos. It's destabilizing. The genetic modifications are breaking down, and it's affecting the mother. If we don't do something soon, we'll lose them both. Ilara's mind raced. This was exactly the kind of scenario they'd feared, a direct result of the controversial genetic engineering. Can you stabilize them? She asked. Dr. Frost shook her head. Not with our current knowledge of Zarkonian physiology. You need to let us handle this, a new voice interrupted. Ilara turned to see a Zarkonian scientist pushing through the crowd, its scales shimmering with determination. This is our technology, our genetics, the scientist continued. Your interference will only make things worse. Dr. Frost bristled. We're trying to save lives here. Ilara could see the situation spiraling out of control. In that moment, she made a decision that she knew could have far-reaching consequences. Both of you, enough, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. Dr. Frost, step aside. Let the Zarkonian scientist work. As the alien approached the biobed, Ilara turned to her chief medical officer. Observe everything they do. If there's even a hint that they're causing more harm, we step in. But for now, we need to trust them. The next hour was one of the most tense in Ilara's career. She watched as the Zarkonian scientist worked with tools and techniques she could barely comprehend, manipulating genetic structures at a level far beyond current Federation capabilities. Finally, with a series of clicks that Ilara's translator rendered as a sigh of relief, the scientist stepped back. It is done. The embryo is stabilized, and the mother will recover. As the tension in the room deflated, Ilara found herself face to face with Commander Zarax, who had arrived during the crisis. You allowed our scientists to work without interference, Zarax said, its tone one of surprise and grudging respect, even knowing that their methods go against your ethical standards. Ilara met the alien's gaze steadily. Sometimes, Commander, we have to set aside our preconceptions and trust in the expertise of others, especially when lives are at stake. Zarax was silent for a moment, then spoke softly. Perhaps there is more for us to learn from humans than we had thought. As Ilara left sickbay, her mind whirled with the implications of what had just occurred. They had averted a crisis, yes, but at what cost? Would Starfleet Command see her decision as a necessary compromise or a dangerous precedent? One thing was clear: the journey towards understanding between humans and Zarkonians was far from over. As she made her way back to her quarters, Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger, more complex story, one that would challenge not just her, but the very foundations of interstellar relations. As the Horizon and the Zarkonian vessel approached Starbase 12, the atmosphere aboard both ships was a mix of anticipation and apprehension. The events in sickbay had opened new avenues of cooperation, but they had also highlighted the vast differences between human and Zarkonian approaches to science and ethics. Captain Ilara Chen stood on the bridge, watching the massive space station grow larger on the view screen. Starbase 12 was a hub of diplomatic activity, its docking arms currently hosting ships from a dozen different species, but none were quite as large or as mysterious as the Zarkonian vessel. "Captain," Lieutenant Patel called from his station. "We're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Zhao." Ilara nodded, steeling herself. "I'll take it in my ready room." As the door slid shut behind her, Ilara took a deep breath before activating her desk's holographic display. Admiral Zhou's stern face materialized before her. "Captain Chen," the Admiral began without preamble, "I've reviewed your reports on the Zarkonian situation. To say that Starfleet Command is concerned would be an understatement." Ilara straightened in her chair. "Sir, I understand the ethical implications of the Zarkonians' genetic engineering practices, but given their circumstances—" "It's not just about their genetics, Captain," Zhao interrupted. "We've received intelligence that suggests the Zarkonians may not have been entirely truthful about their reasons for being in that sector of space." Ilara frowned. "What do you mean, sir?" The Admiral's expression darkened. "There are rumors of a Zarkonian superweapon, Captain. A biological agent capable of targeting specific genetic markers. Some in intelligence believe that this plague might have been a test run." The implications hit Ilara like a physical blow. If this was true, then everything they thought they knew about the Zarkonian situation could be a lie. "What are my orders, Admiral?" she asked, her voice tight. "For now, proceed as planned. Dock at Starbase 12 and assist with the transfer of the Zarkonian passengers. But keep your eyes open, Captain. We need to know the truth before we can proceed with any formal diplomatic relations." As the transmission ended, Ilara sat back in her chair, her mind racing. Could the Zarkonians really be capable of such deception? And if so, what was their true agenda? Her musings were interrupted by the chime of her comm badge. "Bridge to Captain Chen. We're approaching final docking procedures." Pushing her concerns aside for the moment, Ilara returned to the bridge. As they maneuvered into their assigned berth, she couldn't help but notice the increased security presence on the starbase. Clearly, Starfleet was taking no chances. The docking process went smoothly, and soon the Horizon was securely attached to Starbase 12. As Ilara prepared to disembark and meet with Starbase officials, her comm badge chirped again. "Captain," it was Dr. Frost, her voice urgent. "We have a situation in the medical bay. One of the Zarkonian females. She's gone into labor." Ilara's eyes widened. This was unprecedented. No human had ever witnessed a Zarkonian birth before. "I'm on my way," she replied, already moving towards the turbolift. When she arrived at the medical bay, she found it in a state of controlled chaos. The Zarkonian female lay on a biobed, her scales rippling with contractions. Dr. Frost and her team worked alongside Zarkonian medical staff, their usually conflicting methodologies merging in the face of this unique event. "Captain," Dr. Frost called out, her face beaded with sweat. "We're in uncharted territory here. The genetic modifications are making the birthing process unpredictable." As if to underscore her words, the Zarkonian let out a keening wail that made the universal translators screech with feedback. The monitors around the biobed began to flash warning signals. "The infant's life signs are destabilizing. one of the Zarkonian medics announced, its voice tinged with fear. The genetic restructuring is breaking down under the stress of birth. Ilara watched in horror as the situation spiraled out of control. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "What do you need?" she asked, looking between Dr. Frost and the Zarkonian medic. The two medical professionals exchanged a glance. Then the Zarkonian spoke. "We need to stabilize the infant's genetic structure, but our equipment isn't designed for a live birth. We need a quantum stabilizer," Dr. Frost finished. "But ours isn't compatible with Zarkonian physiology." Ilara's mind raced. What if we combine them? Use the precision of our stabilizer with the genetic mapping capabilities of the Zarkonian equipment. For a moment, both doctors looked skeptical, but then understanding dawned on their faces. "It could work," Dr. Frost said, already moving to retrieve the device. What followed was a tense hour of improvisation and collaboration. Human and Zarkonian technologies were hastily integrated, creating a hybrid device that neither species could have developed alone. As the Zarkonian female's contractions reached their peak, the combined medical team worked in perfect sync, their earlier mistrust forgotten in the face of a life-or-death situation. With a final alien cry, the Zarkonian gave birth. The infant, a tiny, shimmering creature, lay silent for a heart-stopping moment. Then, as the hybrid stabilizer did its work, the baby let out a warbling cry that needed no translation. The medical bay erupted in cheers and clicks of joy. Dr. Frost, her face split in a wide grin, turned to Ilara. "We did it, Captain. And more than that, we've made a breakthrough in xenogenetics that could revolutionize both our medical practices." As the excitement began to die down, Ilara found herself face to face with Commander Zarax, who had arrived during the commotion. "Captain Chen," the Zarkonian said, its voice filled with an emotion Ilara's translator couldn't quite capture. "You have once again proven yourself to be a true ally. This child, it represents hope not just for our species, but for the future of our relations." Ilara nodded, feeling a mix of elation and unease. The birth had indeed been a miraculous moment of cooperation, but Admiral Zhao's warning still echoed in her mind. "Commander," she said carefully, "in light of this breakthrough, I hope we can count on full transparency from the Zarkonian people moving forward. There are concerns among my superiors about the true nature of your presence in this sector." Zarax's multifaceted eyes seemed to cloud over. "Ah, you speak of the rumors of a bioweapon." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected the Zarkonian to be so direct. "Yes," she admitted. "There are those who believe the plague that affected your people might have been engineered." For a long moment, Zarax was silent. Then, to Ilara's surprise, the alien let out a sound that her translator rendered as a bitter laugh. "Engineered, yes. But not by us, Captain. We are the victims, not the perpetrators." Ilara's mind reeled. "What do you mean?" Zarax's voice lowered, taking on a conspiratorial tone. "The plague was a weapon, but one created by a third party, a species known to us as the Vexcar. They seek to destabilize this sector, to pit the various races against each other. We came here not just to save our people, but to warn the Federation." As Zarax began to explain further, alarms suddenly blared throughout the starbase. Ilara's comm badge chirped urgently. "Captain, to the bridge immediately." Commander Torres' voice was tight with tension. "We're under attack." Ilara and Zarax exchanged a look of mutual understanding. Whatever was happening, it was clear that their fates were now intertwined. As they raced towards the bridge, Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to face a threat unlike anything either of their species had encountered before. The true test of their newfound alliance was about to begin, and the fate of not just the Zarkonians, but potentially the entire sector, hung in the balance. The bridge of the horizon was a flurry of activity as Captain Ilara Chen and Commander Zarax burst through the turbolift doors. The view screen showed a chaotic scene. Several sleek, Dark ships of unfamiliar design were attacking Starbase 12 and the docked vessels. Report. Ilara barked, sliding into her command chair. Commander Tor's fingers flew over his console. 3 unknown vessels dropped out of warp and immediately opened fire. They're using some kind of energy weapon we've never encountered before. Starbase shields are down to 60% and falling. Ilara turned to Zarax, whose scales had paled to a sickly hue. The Vexcar. The alien commander hissed. They must have followed us. Red alert. Ilara ordered. Shields up. Arm all weapons. Hail the attacking ships. Lieutenant Patel shook his head. No response to hails, Captain. They're jamming all frequencies. The ship rocked as a blast from one of the Vexcar vessels struck their shields. Return fire. Ilara commanded. Target their weapons arrays. As the Horizon engaged the nearest Vexcar ship, Ilara noticed something odd about their attack pattern. They're not just attacking randomly, she realized. They're trying to reach the Zarkonian vessel. Zarax's multifaceted eyes widened in horror. The Genbank. If they destroy it, our entire species is doomed. Ilara's mind raced, analyzing the situation. The Horizon was outnumbered, and the Starbase's defenses were failing. They needed a new strategy, and fast. Commander Zarax, she said, turning to the alien. You said your people came here to warn us. What can you tell me about the Vexcar's weaknesses? Zarax hesitated for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. Their ships use a quantum singularity for power. It gives them incredible energy output, but it's unstable. A precisely targeted tachyon pulse could destabilize it, causing a cascade failure. Ilara nodded, a plan forming in her mind. Lieutenant Reeves, she called to her chief engineer. Can we modify our deflector dish to emit a focused tachyon beam? Reeves' voice came back over the comm, strained but determined. It'll take some doing, Captain, but we should be able to rig something up. Give me 10 minutes. You have 5, Ilara replied grimly. Torres, coordinate with Starbase 12. Have them concentrate all fire on the Lid Vexcar ship. We need to keep them distracted. As the battle raged on, the Horizon danced through space, narrowly avoiding the deadly energy beams of the Vexcar ships while returning fire. The Zarkonian vessel, despite its size, proved surprisingly agile, its alien technology allowing it to provide unexpected support in the fight. Captain, Reeves' voice came over the comm. Tachyon emitter is ready, but we'll only get one shot. The modification is burning out our deflector dish. Ilara steeled herself. This was their one chance. Understood. Helm, bring us about. We need a clear shot at the Lid Vexcar ship. As the Horizon maneuvered into position, the view screen filled with the sight of the sleek, menacing Vexcar vessel. Its dark hull seemed to absorb light, making it look like a hole in space itself. Now, Lieutenant Reeves, Ilara ordered. A brilliant blue beam lanced out from the Horizon's deflector dish, striking the Vexcar ship dead center. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then suddenly, the enemy vessel began to shimmer and distort, as if reality itself was warping around it. It's working, Zarax exclaimed, his scales rippling with excitement. The quantum singularity is collapsing. The Vexcar ship imploded in a spectacular flash of light and energy, the shockwave rocking the surrounding vessels. The 2 remaining enemy ships, seeing their leader destroyed, turned and fled, jumping to warp before anyone could react. A cheer went up on the Horizon's bridge, but Ilara knew the danger wasn't over yet. Damage report, she called out. Shields at 30%, minor hull breaches on decks 4 and 7. Torres reported. Deflector dish is completely burnt out. We won't be going to warp anytime soon. Ilara nodded grimly. They had won the battle, but at a cost. She turned to Zarax, who was staring at the view screen with a mixture of relief and trepidation. I believe, Commander, she said softly, that it's time for full disclosure. The Federation needs to know everything about the Vexcar threat. Zarax nodded slowly. Yes, I suppose it is. But Captain, you must understand. The information we possess, it could change the balance of power in this entire sector. Over the next few hours, as repair crews from both the Horizon and Starbase 12 worked to assess and fix the damage, Ilara sat in intense discussions with Zarax, Starfleet admirals, and Federation diplomats. The story that unfolded was one of intrigue and danger that spanned decades. The Vexcar, it turned out, were a species obsessed with genetic purity. They saw the intermingling of different species as a threat to the cosmic order and had spent centuries developing bioweapons to cleanse entire planets. The plague that had devastated the Zarkonian homeworld was just their latest creation, a test run for a much larger plan. They intend to release a variant of the plague that can target multiple species, Zarax explained, his voice heavy with the weight of the revelation. Humans, Vulcans, Andorians. No one would be safe. That's why we risked everything to come here, to warn you. Admiral Jeo's holographic form nodded gravely. This changes everything. The Federation Council will need to be informed immediately. We may be looking at a sector-wide crisis. As the implications of the Vexcar threat sank in, Ilara found herself marveling at how quickly things had changed. Just days ago, the Zarkonians had been mysterious isolationists. Now, they were potentially crucial allies in a fight that threatened the entire Alpha Quadrant. There's more, Zarax said, his scales shimmering with what Ilara had come to recognize as nervous energy. The genetic modifications we've made to our embryos, they weren't just to counter the effects of the plague. We've been trying to develop a natural immunity to the Vexcar bioweapons. Ilara's eyes widened as she understood the implications. You're saying that the children born from these modified embryos might be the key to stopping the Vexcar? Zarax nodded. It's our hope, but the process is far from perfect. That's why the birth on your ship was so crucial. The combination of our genetic techniques with your medical technology. It might have given us the breakthrough we've been searching for. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. As the Horizon underwent repairs, Ilara found herself at the center of a rapidly forming joint task force. Federation scientists worked alongside Zarkonian geneticists, pooling their knowledge to understand and counter the Vexcar threat. The newborn Zarkonian child, dubbed Hope by the medical staff, became a symbol of the budding alliance. Its unique genetic structure, a blend of carefully engineered Zarkonian genes, and the stabilizing influence of human medical intervention, offered tantalizing clues for developing a defense against the Vexcar bioweapons. As Ilara stood in her ready room, watching shuttles ferry personnel and equipment between the Horizon, the Zarkonian vessel, and Starbase 12, she felt a profound sense of change. The galaxy had become a much larger, more complex place in a matter of days. A chime at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called. Commander Zarax stepped in, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the human surroundings. "Captain Chin." The alien greeted her. I wanted to thank you for everything." Ilara smiled softly. "There's no need, Commander. We faced a common threat and overcame it together. That's what allies do." Zarax's scales rippled in what Ilara had come to recognize as the alien equivalent of a smile. "Allies. Yes, I suppose we are that now. It's a strange feeling after so many years of isolation." "Change often is," Ilara replied, "but it's also an opportunity. Our peoples have so much to learn from each other." As they stood together, looking out at the stars, Ilara felt a sense of hope and excitement for the future. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with diplomatic hurdles, scientific mysteries, and the looming threat of the Vexcar. But they would face it together, human and Zarkonian side by side. "You know," Zarax said, a hint of amusement in its voice, "there's a rumor spreading among my people. They're saying that the human captain who saved us, who made this alliance possible, They're calling you the bridge between worlds." Ilara chuckled, shaking her head. "I'm not sure I deserve such a grand title. I'm just a Starfleet officer doing her duty." "Perhaps," Zarax replied. "But sometimes duty creates legends, and I have a feeling, Captain Ilara Chen, that your legend is just beginning." As the Horizon prepared for its next mission, now part of the Joint Task Force against the Vexcar threat, Ilara knew that the alien commander was right. This was just the beginning. A new chapter in galactic history had been opened, one of cooperation, understanding, and hope in the face of a common enemy. The stars outside seemed to shine brighter, full of promise and possibility. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Ilara was ready to face them, with her crew, her new allies, and the spirit of exploration and diplomacy that had always defined the best of both their species. The adventure, it seemed, was just beginning.